Good evening, traveler. Tonight, we begin a long journey. A journey across centuries, through marble streets and blood-soaked fields, under triumphal arches and into the dim silence of ruins. Tonight, we set sail on the river of history that flows through the heart of the Western world. This is the story of Rome. Not merely a city, not merely an empire, but a vision. One that conquered not only lands, but also time itself. To speak of Rome is to speak of law and empire, of ambition and decadence, of gods and men, of triumphs that touch the heavens and tragedies that sink into the dust. But as with all great stories, we must begin at the beginning, not with emperors in purple robes, not with legions marching beneath the eagle standard, but with a myth whispered in the shadows of antiquity. The birth of Rome itself, the Trojan seed. Before Rome was stone, before it was fire, before it was empire, it was a dream carried by a wandering exile. His name was Aeneas, Prince of Troy. When Troy burned beneath the spears and torches of the Greeks, when its towers crumbled and its heroes lay dead upon the bloody sand, Aeneas gathered his family and fled. Guided by the gods, he carried his father Anchises upon his back, led his young son Ascanius by the hand, and left behind a city that had died but would live again in memory. The poets tell us that the gods gave him a destiny, to wander across seas and storms, to endure loss and longing, until at last he found a place where a new city could rise, a city that would rule the world. This story, carved into verse by Virgil in the Aeneid, is not mere myth. It is a declaration. Rome is not a chance accident of history. Rome is chosen, destined, born of Troy's ashes and divine will. Thus, from its very beginning, Rome carried within itself a sense of inevitability, that it was not simply a city among cities, but the city fated to last. The twins and the wolf. Yet another tale rises from the mists of early memory. The legend of Romulus and Remus. The twin boys, abandoned at birth, set adrift upon the waters of the Tiber. Their cradle washed ashore at the foot of the Palatine Hill, where destiny awaited them. There a she-wolf discovered them. She nursed them at her breast, and the brothers grew strong from her wild milk. Later, a shepherd found them, raised them as his own, and the boys became leaders among men. When at last they sought to found a city, a quarrel arose. Who should rule and where should the walls be raised? The quarrel turned to blood, and Remus fell by his brother's hand. Romulus, victorious yet stained with fratricide, named the city after himself, Rome. This myth, dark and powerful, tells us something essential about the Roman spirit. The city's foundation was not a tale of harmony, but of conflict. Rome was born not in peace, but in struggle, brother against brother, blood spilled upon the soil, destiny sealed in sacrifice. Kings of early Rome. So the city was founded, but who would guide it? Tradition speaks of 7 kings who reigned before the Republic was born. Romulus himself ruled first, establishing the Senate, the Council of Elders, and giving structure to the new city. He vanished, legend says, in a storm, lifted to the heavens, perhaps, or torn to pieces by senators weary of his power. After him came Numa Pompilius, a king of peace, who gave Rome its sacred rituals, its calendar, its temples to the gods. If Romulus gave Rome strength, Numa gave it spirit. Then Tullus Hostilius, who waged wars against Alba Longa and other neighbors. Then Ancus Marcius, builder of bridges and harbors. Each king left his mark, some with temples, others with blood, all with memory. But among them one looms large, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. A tyrant, a man who ruled with cruelty, who silenced dissent, who filled Rome with fear. His downfall came not from his enemies in battle, but from his own house. His son, Sextus Tarquinius, violated a noblewoman named Lucretia. Her honor shattered, Lucretia took her own life, but not before calling for vengeance. Her death ignited a fire that could not be quenched. The people rose, drove out the Tarquins, and swore never again to suffer kings. Thus, from outrage and blood, Rome became a republic. The birth of the republic. In 509 BCE, the monarchy was cast aside. In its place rose a system unlike any before, the Roman Republic. No single man would rule. Instead, power would be divided, consuls elected yearly, magistrates for specific duties, the Senate guiding the state with its ancient authority. Rome became a city where ambition was both encouraged and restrained, where no man could call himself king, yet every man could dream of glory. This new system, fragile yet resilient, would shape Rome for nearly 5 centuries. It was not perfect. It was filled with tensions, corruption, and inequality. Yet it gave Rome the foundation upon which an empire could be built. The struggle of the orders. In the early republic, Rome was divided: patricians, the old noble families, and plebeians, the common people. The patricians held power in the Senate, in the priesthoods, in the magistracies. The plebeians labored, fought in the armies, paid the taxes, but had little say. This imbalance led to the conflict of the orders, a centuries-long struggle for rights and representation. The plebeians withdrew from the city in protest, refusing to fight in the legions until reforms were made. Slowly, painfully, changes came. Tribunes elected to defend plebeian interests, the 12 tables carved in bronze to make the law public, access to offices once closed to common men. Rome, unlike other cities, adapted, compromised, adjusted, evolved. This flexibility, this ability to bend without breaking, was one of Rome's greatest strengths. Expansion across Italy. While Rome argued within, it also fought without. The city was not content to remain a small town on the Tiber. Its armies marched against neighboring tribes, Etruscans to the north, Latins to the south, Samnites in the mountains. Through centuries of wars, Rome grew. Defeat never crushed it. Each loss only hardened its will. Victory brought new lands, new allies, new soldiers. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome commanded all of Italy. Its citizens and allies filled the legions. Its roads linked towns to the capital. Its gods spread across the land. Rome was no longer just a city. It was becoming a power. Rome's identity. From the very beginning, Rome saw itself not only as strong, but as destined. Its myths of Trojan exiles and wolf-born twins, its tales of kings both noble and corrupt, its republic born of outrage. All of these gave Romans a sense that their history was not random, but guided. They were a people of struggle, of discipline, of persistence. They believed that their city would endure because it had been forged in fire, fire of exile, fire of fratricide, fire of tyranny and revolt. And so, when Rome looked outward, across Italy, across the seas, it carried with it not only legions and swords, but a deep conviction. Rome was meant to rule. And so, dear listener, we have traced the first steps of a city that would become the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. From the flight of Aeneas, to the wolf nursing the twins, to the blood of Lucretia, to the rise of the Republic, Rome has already shown us a truth. Greatness is never born in peace. It is born in struggle, in sacrifice, in stories that echo across centuries. In the next part, we will walk deeper into the Republic, into the Senate halls where ambition burns, into the legions that march across Italy, into the conflicts that will test whether Rome can remain united under its new experiment in government. The city is founded. The Republic has risen. Now the empire waits, hidden in the shadows of time. Rest well, for the story has only just begun. Good evening once again, dear traveler. The fires of early Rome still glow in our memory. The twins raised by a wolf, the kings who built and conquered, the tyranny that ended with the expulsion of the Tarquins and the birth of the Republic. Tonight, we step inside that Republic, into the marble and shadow of the Senate House, into the crowded streets where plebeians cry out for rights, into the ranks of the legions marching across Italy. We will see not only Rome's strength, but its fragile balance of power, a balance that allowed it to endure for centuries, even as ambition threatened to tear it apart. The shape of the Republic. Rome's monarchy had fallen. In its place, a new system rose, not rule by one, but rule by many. Yet this was not democracy as we might imagine it. The Romans did not believe in equality, not in the modern sense. They believed in hierarchy, in rank, in a society where every man had a place, and every place had its honor. At the top stood two consuls elected yearly, each with equal power. They commanded armies, presided over the Senate, enforced laws. No man could rule alone. Each consul held the power to veto the other, to prevent the rise of another tyrant. Beneath them, magistrates, praetors for justice, quaestors for finances, aediles for public works and festivals, censors to keep the rolls of citizens. And above them all, the Senate, a council of elders, drawn from Rome's noble families, whose authority was not written in law but carved into custom. The Senate advised, guided, whispered, and in time, its voice became as heavy as law itself. This was Rome's genius. Not a perfect system, but a layered one, where no single man could hold unchecked power. In theory, it was a safeguard against tyranny. In practice, it was a stage where ambition played endlessly, checked by rivals, sharpened by conflict, restrained but never extinguished. Patricians and plebeians. Yet beneath this structure lay a wound, the divide between patricians and plebeians. The patricians were the old families, the descendants of those who had shaped Rome since its founding. They claimed the right to rule, to interpret the will of the gods, to dominate the Senate and magistracies. The plebeians were the commoners, farmers, laborers, soldiers. They bled in Rome's wars, paid Rome's taxes, built Rome's walls, but they had little say in how the city was governed. Resentment grew. Again and again, plebeians withdrew from the city, refusing to fight in the legions until their voices were heard. These secessions of the plebs were Rome's great strikes, peaceful rebellions that forced the patricians to compromise. And compromise they did. Out of struggle came the office of the tribune of the plebs, men elected to defend plebeian interests. Sacred, untouchable, they had the power to veto decisions that harmed the people. Later came the 12 Tables, Rome's first written code of law, displayed publicly so that no patrician could twist justice in secret. Later still came access to the consulship, once barred to plebeians, now opened after generations of protest. The Republic survived because it bent. Where other states might have broken under class conflict, Rome adapted slowly, painfully, but steadily. This ability to absorb tension, to make concessions while preserving unity, was one of Rome's greatest strengths. Religion and ritual. But the Republic was not held together by laws alone. It was bound by religion, by a sense that Rome's destiny was tied to the favor of the gods. Every decision of the state required ritual. Sacrifices before battle, auguries before laws, festivals to honor Jupiter, Juno, Mars, and Vesta. Priests, drawn from noble families, interpreted the will of the divine. Rome's religion was not about salvation or personal faith. It was about order, about harmony between mortals and gods. If Rome prospered, it was because the rituals were performed, the gods honored, the omens read correctly. If Rome suffered defeat, it was because some duty had been neglected. In this way, politics and religion were woven tightly together. A senator could delay a law by declaring the omens unfavorable. A general could claim victory because the gods favored his cause. To be Roman was to live in a city where every feast, every flame, every march of soldiers echoed with the presence of the divine. The legions. If religion gave Rome spirit, the legions gave it strength. Every citizen was a soldier. Service in the army was not optional. It was a duty, a burden, and an honor. Farmers laid down their plows, craftsmen their tools, and marched beneath the eagle standard. The early legions were not yet the professional armies of later centuries. They were citizen militias called forth in times of war, returning to their fields when peace returned. Yet even in these early days, the discipline of the Roman soldier was unmatched. They fought in ordered ranks, shields locked, spears thrusting forward in relentless rhythm. Defeat did not break them. Each loss taught them, hardened them, drove them to adapt. In time, this persistence made them nearly unstoppable. And as Rome conquered more, each victory brought more men under her command. Allies supplied troops, conquered peoples contributed soldiers, until the legions swelled with the strength of Italy itself. Rome's armies were not merely instruments of war. They were schools of discipline. For in serving Rome, men learned obedience, endurance, loyalty to the state above all. This military spirit would become the backbone of the empire. Expansion and diplomacy. Rome did not grow by war alone. It grew by alliance, by cunning diplomacy, by weaving defeated enemies into its system rather than simply crushing them. When Rome conquered a town, it did not always destroy it. Instead, it offered a bargain. Loyalty in exchange for protection, tribute in exchange for a share in Rome's rising glory. Some allies were granted partial citizenship, others the promise of eventual inclusion. This web of alliances created a network of strength. When enemies threatened, Rome could call upon allies who fought not only out of fear, but out of hope, hope that their loyalty would bring them closer to the heart of Rome. Thus, by the 3rd century BCE, Rome commanded not only her own citizens, but an entire peninsula bound together by roads, treaties, and the promise of Roman power. The spirit of the Republic. In all these things, the Senate, the tribunes, the legions, the alliances, we see the spirit of the Republic. It was a system not of perfection, but of balance. A system where power was divided, where ambition was both checked and encouraged, where conflict was not avoided but absorbed. Romans were a people who believed that greatness came not from comfort, but from struggle. They looked upon their city as eternal, not because it was free of strife, but because it had been forged in strife and endured. This spirit would carry them through centuries of conquest. Yet within this same spirit lay the seeds of Rome's greatest danger. For ambition, once unleashed, cannot easily be contained. And so we leave the early republic, a city no longer ruled by kings, but by laws and men who struggled endlessly for power and honor. A city whose legions were learning the discipline that would one day conquer the world. A city whose people, divided by class, still found ways to compromise and remain united. In our next part, the story darkens. Rome will look beyond Italy, across the seas, and face its first great rival, Carthage. The Punic Wars will test Rome's endurance, its armies, and its destiny. In those wars, we will see elephants crossing snowy mountains, seas filled with burning ships, and the clash of two civilizations for control of the Mediterranean. Rest now, for tomorrow we march to war, and the name of Hannibal waits in the distance. Good evening once more, dear listener. Tonight, the horizon widens. Rome has conquered Italy, forged alliances, disciplined its armies, and built a republic strong enough to endure centuries of internal conflict. But now, its destiny will collide with another power. A city rich, ancient, and proud, mistress of the western seas. That city was Carthage. And between Rome and Carthage would erupt a struggle so fierce, so enduring, that it would shape the course of the ancient world. These wars, the Punic Wars, were not mere battles of armies. They were battles of civilizations. Rome, with its farmers-turned-soldiers and iron discipline, against Carthage, with its fleets, its wealth, and its mercenary armies. For over a century, their conflict would rage until only one remained. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE. The spark was Sicily, fertile, wealthy, strategically placed at the center of the Mediterranean. Both Rome and Carthage desired it. Both claimed influence there, and when local disputes drew them into open conflict, war became inevitable. Rome had never been a naval power. The strength lay in legions, not in fleets. Carthage, by contrast, was a master of the sea, its harbors filled with ships, its sailors skilled in maneuver and ramming. At first, Rome struggled. Its soldiers could not match Carthaginian sailors. But Rome, as always, learned. Captured Carthaginian ships were studied, copied, reproduced. And to overcome their inexperience at sea, Romans invented the corvus, a boarding device, a kind of bridge with a spike that dropped onto enemy decks. Naval battles became infantry battles on water, where Rome's soldiers could fight as if on land.
Slowly, Pamphili, Rome adapted.
After more than 20 years of struggle, Rome emerged victorious. Sicily became its first province beyond Italy, and Carthage, though still powerful, was forced to pay heavy tribute. But Rome had tasted the wider world, and Carthage, humiliated, began to prepare for revenge. The rise of Hannibal. Carthage looked to Spain, rich in silver and soldiers, as the base for its recovery. There, a great general arose, Hamilcar Barca, and after him, his son Hannibal. Hannibal was not only a soldier, he was a force of nature. From childhood, he had been bound by oath, never to be a friend to Rome. His hatred burned with religious intensity, and his genius on the battlefield would soon make him the most feared enemy Rome ever faced. In 218 BCE, Hannibal struck. He marched from Spain across Gaul and then, in a move that would echo forever in history, across the Alps. The march across the Alps. Picture it. Tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalry, and yes, even elephants, climbing snowy passes where no army had ever dared. The cold bit into flesh, avalanches roared down the slopes, hostile tribes attacked from the cliffs. Men froze, starved, fell into the abyss. But Hannibal endured. Though he lost many, those who survived emerged into Italy like ghosts out of legend, hardened, desperate, and ready to bring Rome to its knees. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE. Hannibal descended upon Italy like a storm. At the Trebia River, he crushed a Roman army. At Lake Trasimene, he ambushed and destroyed another, slaughtering tens of thousands.
Rome trembled.
Panic spread. Yet Hannibal was not finished. In 216 BCE at Cannae, he achieved his masterpiece. Facing a Roman army twice the size of his own, Hannibal arranged his troops in a crescent formation. As the Romans pressed forward, he allowed the center to bend, then enveloped them on all sides. It was a slaughter. Nearly 50,000 Romans lay dead, their blood soaking the fields. It was one of the greatest defeats in Roman history. In that moment, Rome seemed doomed. Allies defected, cities wavered, fear spread through the Republic. Yet Rome did not surrender. The Roman response. Here we see the true character of Rome. Any other city might have yielded, signed peace, bent before Hannibal's brilliance. But Rome refused. They raised new legions year after year. They forbade negotiation, declaring that Rome would never bow while a single citizen could bear arms. They appointed Fabius Maximus, the delayer, who avoided direct battle and instead harassed Hannibal, cutting off supplies, burning crops, denying him decisive victory. It was a war of attrition, of endurance. Hannibal won battle after battle, but he could not break Rome's will. And slowly, the tide turned. Scipio Africanus. From the ashes of defeat rose a new Roman commander, Publius Cornelius Scipio, later called Africanus. Young, daring, charismatic, Scipio studied Hannibal's methods and began to turn them against him. He struck at Carthage's holdings in Spain, driving the Carthaginians out and cutting off their resources. Then he carried the war into Africa itself, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal from Italy. In 202 BCE, at Zama, Scipio and Hannibal met face to face. Elephants thundered across the field, cavalry clashed, infantry locked in deadly struggle. Hannibal fought with genius to the end, but Scipio had adapted too well.
Rome triumphed.
Hannibal fled into exile. Carthage, once mistress of the seas, was broken. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, but Rome was not finished. For half a century, Carthage survived, paying tribute, its power gone but its pride intact. Some Romans feared it might rise again. Cato the Elder, every time he spoke in the Senate, ended his speeches with the same words: Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. At last, Rome acted. In the Third Punic War, Roman legions besieged the city. For 3 years, Carthage resisted with desperate courage. Men, women, children fought in the streets. Flames consumed the houses. Blood ran in the alleys. In 146 BCE, Carthage fell. Its walls were torn down, its people slaughtered or enslaved. The city was wiped from the earth. Rome now stood unrivaled in the Western Mediterranean. Its only true rival was gone. But in victory, Rome had changed. Transformation of the Republic. The Punic Wars had left Rome triumphant, but also transformed. The legions were now seasoned veterans, hardened by decades of war. Generals grew powerful, celebrated by their soldiers, feared by the Senate. Provinces beyond Italy poured wealth and slaves into Rome, feeding both luxury and corruption. The Republic had won, but it was no longer the same Republic. The balance of power that had once held Rome together began to strain. Ambition grew sharper, inequality wider, politics bloodier. And yet, in the ashes of Carthage, Rome's destiny expanded. The Mediterranean was now a Roman lake. The Republic had become an empire in all but name. And so, dear traveler, we leave behind the burning ruins of Carthage. Rome has proven itself against the greatest enemy it ever faced. Hannibal, with his elephants and his genius, could not destroy it. Carthage, with its wealth and fleets, could not outlast it. Rome has emerged supreme, but victory carries its own dangers. For the Republic, swollen with power and riches, will now turn inward, into crisis and civil war. Its own citizens will soon prove more dangerous than any foreign foe. In our next part, we will step into that crisis. We will see the rise of ambitious men, the Gracchi brothers, Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar. We will see the Republic bleed, not from foreign invasion, but from its own ambitions. And in that struggle, the Republic itself will die. Rest well, for the shadows of tyranny are drawing near. Good evening once more, traveler of history. We have walked with Rome through her rise, from wolf-born myth to the founding of the Republic, from class struggle to the Punic Wars, from the snowy passes of Hannibal's Alps to the burning ruins of Carthage. Rome stands now as the unchallenged mistress of the Mediterranean. But power, once gained, has a way of tearing at the bonds that hold a state together. The Republic, victorious abroad, begins to crumble at home. The Senate is swollen with wealth, but corrupted. The people cry for bread and justice, but are silenced. Ambition sharpens like a dagger in the dark. Tonight, we descend into the age of crisis, a century of turmoil, where generals marched on Rome, where the blood of citizens flowed in the Forum, and where, at last, the Republic gave way to empire. Wealth and inequality. After the Punic Wars, wealth poured into Rome. Provinces yielded taxes and tribute. Slaves flooded the markets. Silver from Spain filled the coffers. Senators grew rich beyond imagination, their estates spreading across the countryside. But while the few prospered, the many suffered. Small farmers, once the backbone of Rome's legions, were ruined. Their fields lay abandoned, bought up by nobles who turned them into vast estates worked by slaves. Displaced, these farmers crowded into the city, swelling the ranks of the poor. The Republic, once a balance between patricians and plebeians, now bent under the weight of inequality. A new class of restless citizens filled the streets, demanding relief. The Gracchi brothers. Into this turmoil stepped two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Both were tribunes of the plebs. Both believed Rome's greatness could not survive without justice for her people. Tiberius proposed land reforms, to break up the vast estates of the rich and restore land to the poor. The Senate resisted fiercely. When Tiberius sought re-election, violence erupted. Armed senators and their followers beat him and hundreds of his supporters to death, the first bloodshed of its kind in the streets of Rome. Years later, his brother Gaius renewed the fight. He proposed grain subsidies for the poor, citizenship for Rome's Italian allies, reforms to check senatorial corruption. Again, the Senate resisted. Again, violence followed. Surrounded by enemies, Gaius chose suicide over capture. Thousands of his followers were slaughtered. The Republic had crossed a threshold. Political disputes were no longer settled only by debate and compromise, but by blood. The rise of generals. In this climate, generals became the true power. The legions, once loyal to the Senate and the state, now found themselves loyal to their commanders. The men who paid them, fed them, promised them land. Gaius Marius, a soldier of humble origins, rose to prominence with sweeping reforms. He recruited the poor into the legions, offering them pay, equipment, and the promise of land after service. For the first time, the Roman army became a career for the masses, not just a duty for landowners. This gave Rome a professional army, stronger, more disciplined, but it also gave soldiers loyalty not to Rome, but to their generals. And soon, those generals would use their armies not only against foreign enemies, but against each other. Sulla and the March on Rome. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a patrician general, emerged as one of the most ruthless figures of this age. He fought wars in the East, defeated kings, and returned with glory. But when political rivals tried to strip him of command, Sulla did the unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome itself. Never before had Roman soldiers attacked their own city. But with Sulla, the precedent was set. Rome's streets ran red with civil war. Sulla seized power, declared himself dictator, and unleashed proscriptions. Lists of enemies condemned to death. Senators, equestrians, citizens. Anyone who had opposed him was slaughtered, their property seized, their families ruined. When Sulla at last resigned, believing he had restored the Republic, what he had truly done was show Rome that the Republic could be seized by force. Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar. After Sulla's death, new men rose. Pompey the Great, conqueror of the East, celebrated triumphs that filled Rome with awe. Marcus Licinius Crassus, richest man in Rome, crushed the slave rebellion of Spartacus, crucifying thousands along the Appian Way. And then came Julius Caesar, ambitious, eloquent, daring. He allied with Pompey and Crassus in what became known as the First Triumvirate, a partnership that bent the Republic to their will. Together, they divided power, secured offices, and carved up Rome's provinces for their own ambitions. Julius Caesar in Gaul. For nearly a decade, Caesar waged war in Gaul. His commentaries record the campaigns. Rivers crossed, fortresses stormed, tribes subdued. By the time he was finished, millions were dead or enslaved, and Rome's borders stretched to the English Channel. But more than territory, Caesar won loyalty. His soldiers adored him, willing to follow him anywhere. His popularity among the people grew as stories of his victories filled the streets. The Senate grew uneasy. Pompey, once his ally, turned against him. The balance was breaking. Crossing the Rubicon. In 49 BCE, the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. To obey would mean ruin. To resist would mean civil war.
Caesar cosa
With a single legion, he crossed the small river Rubicon, declaring Alia iacta est. The die is cast. It was an act of defiance that shook the world. To cross the Rubicon was to march on Rome, to declare that the Republic was no longer sacred. Civil war erupted. Civil war and dictatorship. Caesar moved swiftly. He defeated Pompey's forces in Italy, then pursued him across Greece. To Pharsalus, in 48 BCE, Caesar triumphed. Pompey fled to Egypt, only to be murdered on the shores of Alexandria. Caesar followed, becoming entangled with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Their alliance, political and romantic, produced a child and bound Egypt's fate to Rome's for generations to come. Returning to Rome, Caesar was made dictator. He reformed the calendar, expanded the Senate, enacted laws to ease debt and reward veterans. Yet his power alarmed many. Was he restoring Rome or ending it? When, in 44 BCE, he accepted the title Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, the Senate trembled. And so, on the Ides of March, conspirators struck. Daggers flashed in the Senate house. Caesar fell beneath the blows, his blood staining the floor, his last breath echoing through history. The Republic had killed its would-be king. But in doing so, it sealed its own fate. And so, dear listener, we leave Rome in chaos once more. The Gracchi brothers tried reform and were slain. Marius raised armies of the poor.
Sulla marche ton Rome.
Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar bent the Republic to their will. And Caesar himself, betrayed by his peers, fell beneath their knives. The Republic is bleeding out. It cannot contain the ambitions of its own sons. Its laws, once sacred, are now weapons in the hands of generals. Its balance of power has collapsed beneath wealth, inequality, and war. In our next part, the curtain will rise on the first true emperor. We will follow Octavian, Caesar's heir, as he defeats Mark Antony and Cleopatra, as he transforms the Republic into the Empire, and as he inaugurates the Pax Romana, Rome's golden age of peace and power. Rest well, for when we return, the Republic will die, and the Empire will be born. Good evening once again, dear listener. The Republic lies broken. Julius Caesar is dead, struck down on the Ides of March, betrayed by those who once called him friend. His blood still darkens the stones of the Senate floor. His vision of power, his reforms, his unchallenged authority, all lie shattered with his body. But Rome is not at peace. The conspirators, Brutus and Cassius, hoped that Caesar's death would restore the Republic. Instead, it plunged the city into chaos. For Caesar's shadow still loomed over Rome, and from that shadow stepped the man who would inherit not only his name, but his destiny. That man was Octavian, the one whom history would call Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, the heir of Caesar. Octavian was young, only 18 when Caesar died. Few took him seriously at first. He was thin, sickly, inexperienced, but he possessed something more valuable than strength: patience, cunning, and Caesar's name. In his will, Julius Caesar had adopted Octavian as his son and heir. It was a masterstroke from beyond the grave. The people of Rome, who had loved Caesar, now turned their eyes to the boy who carried his legacy. Octavian moved carefully. He gathered allies, secured the loyalty of legions, and began to present himself as the defender of Caesar's memory. He was not yet strong enough to rule, but he was clever enough to bide his time. The second triumvirate. To survive, Octavian joined forces with Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted general, and Marcus Lepidus, a powerful statesman. Together, they formed the Second Triumvirate, a three-man rule with powers greater than the Senate itself. Their first act was vengeance. They declared Caesar's assassins enemies of the state. Proscriptions followed. Lists of men condemned to death, their property seized, their families destroyed. Blood returned to Rome's streets, just as it had under Sulla. Brutus and Cassius, the leading conspirators, raised armies in the east. The triumvirs pursued them. At Philippi in 42 BCE, the armies clashed. Brutus and Cassius were defeated, and both took their own lives. The dream of restoring the Republic died with them. But unity among the triumvirs could not last. Lepidus faded into obscurity. Rivalry grew between Octavian and Mark Antony. The stage was set for another civil war, one that would decide Rome's future forever. Antony and Cleopatra. Mark Antony, powerful and charismatic, turned eastward. In Egypt, he found not only wealth, but love, the queen, Cleopatra. Their affair became legend. The Roman general and the Egyptian queen, united by passion and ambition. Together, they envisioned a new empire, one centered not in Rome, but in Alexandria. To the Roman Senate, it looked like betrayal. To Octavian, it was opportunity. He launched a campaign of propaganda. Antony, he declared, had abandoned Rome for the arms of a foreign queen. Cleopatra was painted as a seductress, a threat to Roman virtue, a queen who would enslave Rome beneath her charm. The people believed it. War was declared, not against Antony directly, but against Cleopatra, queen of Egypt. Actium, the decisive battle. In 31 BCE, the two forces met at Actium, a naval battle off the coast of Greece. Octavian commanded Rome's fleet, guided by his brilliant Admiral Agrippa. Antony and Cleopatra's ships were larger, more decorated, but less maneuverable. As the battle raged, Cleopatra suddenly turned her fleet and fled. Antony, torn between duty and desire, followed. Their forces collapsed. The battle was lost. Defeated, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt. He expanded Rome into Britannia, adding new provinces to the empire's map. But palace intrigue plagued him, and whispers said his death came by poison, served by his ambitious wife Agrippina. And then came Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudians, infamous for extravagance and cruelty. He loved music, theater, and performance more than governance. When Rome burned in 64 CE, rumors claimed he watched the flames while singing of Troy. He blamed the Christians, beginning their persecution. His excesses alienated the Senate, the army, and the people. At last, declared an enemy of Rome, Nero took his own life, crying, "What an artist dies in me!" Thus ended the first dynasty of emperors, an age of brilliance and scandal, of expansion and chaos. The year of the four emperors. With Nero's death, Rome plunged into civil war. In a single year, 4 men claimed the throne: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian. Legions fought legions. Cities were plundered. The empire shook with uncertainty. But from this chaos emerged stability once more. Vespasian, practical and stern, restored order. He founded the Flavian dynasty, rebuilt Rome's finances, and began construction of one of the most iconic monuments in history, the Colosseum. The Flavians and the Colosseum. The Colosseum, the Flavian amphitheater, rose from the ruins of Nero's Golden House, a symbol of power returned to the people. Built to seat tens of thousands, it hosted games of unimaginable scale, gladiatorial combats, wild beast hunts, mock naval battles. Here, the people of Rome found spectacle and distraction. Blood flowed for entertainment, men fought for honor and survival, and emperors won popularity by providing bread and circuses. Vespasian's son Titus completed the Colosseum. His short reign was marked by tragedy. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, and a devastating fire in Rome itself. Yet he was remembered with affection, called the darling of the human race. His brother Domitian followed, stern and autocratic. He ruled efficiently but harshly, earning the hatred of the Senate. In the end, he too fell to assassination, his memory condemned. The height of power, the 5 good emperors. After Domitian's death, a new age dawned, the era of the 5 good emperors. For nearly a century, Rome enjoyed stability, wise leadership, and expansion. Nerva, chosen by the Senate, restored dignity to the office. Trajan, his adopted heir, led Rome to its greatest territorial extent. Under Trajan, the empire stretched from the sands of Arabia to the forests of Britain, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. His conquests in Dacia filled Rome's coffers with gold, funding triumphal arches and monuments that still stand today. Hadrian, successor to Trajan, shifted Rome's focus from conquest to consolidation. He traveled across the empire, inspecting provinces, building fortifications. In Britannia, he raised the famous Hadrian's Wall, marking the empire's northernmost frontier. He adorned Athens with temples, brought order to the provinces, and left behind a legacy of architecture and reform. Antoninus Pius followed, presiding over an era of peace and prosperity, remembered as a just and gentle ruler. And then came Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor. A Stoic, he wrote meditations that still guide us today, reflections on duty, virtue, and the fleeting nature of life. Yet his reign was not without trial. Plagues swept through the empire, and wars raged along the Danube frontier. He bore these burdens with calm resolve, a thinker forced into war by necessity. His death marked the end of Rome's golden age, for he left the throne to his son Commodus, and with Commodus the rot began to spread once more. Life in the empire, but while emperors rose and fell, the empire itself thrived. Roads carried soldiers, merchants, and messages across thousands of miles. Aqueducts brought water to cities. Markets overflowed with goods from across the known world. Spices from India, silks from China, grain from Egypt. For ordinary Romans, life varied greatly. The wealthy reclined in villas decorated with mosaics and frescoes, their banquets filled with wine, music, and conversation. The poor crowded into insulae, apartment blocks that often collapsed or burned. Yet even they found pride in the empire, attending games, festivals, and religious rituals that bound them to Rome's destiny. Slavery underpinned it all. Millions toiled in fields, mines, and households, unseen engines of Rome's prosperity. Freedom could be earned, but many lived and died as property. Their labor built the monuments, tilled the soil, and rowed the galleys that carried Rome's power. Religion too shaped daily life. The old gods of Jupiter, Juno, and Mars were still honored, but new cults spread, Mithras from the east, Isis from Egypt, and slowly, quietly, Christianity whispered among the poor and marginalized. And so, dear listener, we stand with Rome at her height. The Colosseum gleams, filled with cheers. Roads and aqueducts stretch across the empire. Trajan expands its borders farther than ever. Hadrian builds walls to guard its frontiers. Marcus Aurelius writes words of wisdom even as he leads armies in the snow. This is Rome at its zenith, the empire of marble and might, of philosophers and gladiators, of emperors both wise and wicked. Yet beneath the splendor, cracks begin to show. Plagues, pressures at the frontiers, the burden of too much land, the dangers of dynastic succession. In our next part, we will descend into those shadows. We will follow the empire as it strains under its own weight, as crises spread, as emperors rise and fall with dizzying speed. The glory of Rome is real, but so too is its fragility. Rest now, for the road ahead grows darker. Good evening again, dear traveler. We have stood with Rome in her zenith, her emperors triumphant, her borders vast, her monuments eternal. We have watched legions march across continents, philosophers rule from thrones, and poets sing of destiny. But greatness, like sunlight, casts shadows. Tonight, we walk into that twilight, an age when Rome, though still mighty, begins to strain beneath her own weight. The emperors of this era sought to preserve what had been won, to guard borders, to rule wisely. And yet, war, plague, and discontent gnawed at the empire. This is the story of glory tempered by shadow, of Rome's brilliance flickering against the winds of fate. Hadrian, the architect of boundaries. After Trajan's vast conquests, Hadrian reigned. He was not a conqueror, but a consolidator. Where Trajan had pushed Rome to its furthest extent, Hadrian pulled back, strengthening what could be held. He traveled ceaselessly to Gaul, to Greece, to Egypt, to the edges of Britannia. He walked among soldiers, inspected defenses, listened to the provinces. In Britain, he raised the great wall that still bears his name, stretching from sea to sea. Not a barrier to all invasions, but a line of control, a mark of empire at its furthest north. Hadrian was also a lover of culture. He adorned Athens with temples, supported philosophers, and filled the empire with architecture that blended Roman strength and Greek elegance. Yet his personal life carried sorrow. His beloved Antinous, a youth of extraordinary beauty, drowned in the Nile. In grief, Hadrian deified him, scattering statues of Antinous across the empire, fusing love and divinity in marble. Hadrian ruled with wisdom, but also with stern discipline. He saw the limits of Rome and accepted them. In his reign, the empire paused, a pause that revealed both strength and fragility. Antoninus Pius, the gentle emperor. Hadrian's chosen successor, Antoninus Pius, ruled in peace. His reign was marked by prosperity, justice, and kindness. The empire flourished without great wars, without turmoil. Temples rose, laws were reformed, provinces thrived. So peaceful was his rule that later generations called it a golden age within the golden age. He was remembered as patient, generous, and dutiful. His nickname, Pius, reflected his devotion both to the gods and to Rome. Yet even in this era of peace, the seeds of crisis remained. For it is not only war that tests an empire, but time. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. Then came Marcus Aurelius, last of the 5 good emperors. He was no ordinary ruler. He was a stoic philosopher, a man who wrote not of conquest, but of virtue, duty, and the fleeting nature of life. His meditations, written in the quiet of his tent, still speak to us. Reminders to endure hardship, to accept fate, to live rightly even in chaos. But Marcus's reign was anything but peaceful. From the north came Germanic tribes pressing against the Danube frontier. From the east came Parthian armies, testing Rome's power in Asia. And within the empire, plague struck. The Antonine plague, carried home by soldiers, sweeping through cities, killing millions. Rome bled, yet Marcus endured. He campaigned in the cold forests of the north, leading his legions through mud and snow, writing words of wisdom between battles. He carried the empire on his shoulders, both emperor and philosopher, warrior and thinker. Yet even the wise cannot escape fate. Marcus, so devoted to duty, made one fateful error. He left the empire to his son, Commodus. Commodus, the descent. Commodus was everything his father was not. Where Marcus sought wisdom, Commodus sought pleasure. Where Marcus endured hardship, Commodus basked in luxury. He fancied himself Hercules reborn, fighting in the Colosseum dressed as a gladiator. The people watched in awe and horror as their emperor played at combat, slaying wild beasts, mocking the dignity of his office. Corruption spread. Assassinations plotted. Fear filled the palace. The Senate despised him. The army mocked him. The people whispered of madness. At last, in 192 CE, Commodus was strangled in his bath by conspirators. His death ended the Antonine dynasty, and with it, the stability Rome had known for nearly a century. Shadows across the empire. The death of Commodus was not only the fall of a man, but the beginning of a storm. The empire, though still vast and rich, began to fracture under the weight of its own contradictions. The legions, once guardians of Rome, now chose emperors of their own. Generals vied for power, marching armies into civil war. Provinces strained under taxes. Peasants suffered. Slaves rebelled. And always, beyond the frontiers, pressures mounted. Germanic tribes pressing from the north, Persians rising in the east, nomads threatening the far frontiers. Rome was still mighty. Her monuments still gleamed. Her roads still stretched across the world. Her name still commanded awe. But the shadows had deepened, for the empire had reached its peak, and from that peak there is only descent. And so, dear listener, we stand at the turning point. We have seen Hadrian's walls, Antoninus's peace, Marcus Aurelius's wisdom, and Commodus's folly. We have watched Rome shine in glory, and we have watched the first cracks spread across her marble face. The empire is still vast, still powerful, still feared. But the age of stability is over. Ahead lies turmoil. Civil wars, plagues, invasions, emperors rising and falling in rapid succession. In our next part, we will walk into that chaos, the 3rd century crisis, when emperors are made and unmade by the sword, when Rome nearly falls apart, when survival itself becomes uncertain. Rest now, for the storm is gathering, and the empire will be tested as never before. Good evening once more, dear traveler. We have seen Rome in her zenith, gleaming in marble, her emperors both wise and cruel, her armies stretching across the world. But the glory of Marcus Aurelius ended with the madness of Commodus, and with his death, stability shattered. Tonight, we walk into the 3rd century, an age of turmoil, chaos, and near collapse. The empire will face enemies without, corruption within, and storms that shake her very foundations. This is the age of crisis and division, when Rome nearly ceases to be. The death of Commodus and the year of the 5 emperors. When Commodus fell in 192 CE, assassinated in his bath, Rome rejoiced. But the joy was short-lived. Power, once released from the hands of a dynasty, became a prize for any who could seize it. The Senate declared Pertinax emperor, a man of discipline and reform. But he reigned for only 3 months before the Praetorian Guard, Rome's supposed protectors, murdered him for refusing their bribes. In their greed, the Guard did the unthinkable. They auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus paid a fortune to be emperor, buying Rome itself as if it were a commodity. The people mocked him, the legions despised him, and within weeks he too was dead. Civil war erupted.
Rival generals clashed. Septimius Severus, Pesenius Niger, Clodius Albinus.
Severus triumphed, marching into Rome with his legions, founding the Severan dynasty. The Severan dynasty. Septimius Severus was ruthless and pragmatic. He strengthened the army, increased soldiers' pay, and made the legions the true foundation of imperial power. His advice to his sons was simple: enrich the soldiers and despise everyone else. His sons, Caracalla and Geta, were meant to rule together. Instead, Caracalla murdered his brother and unleashed massacres upon those who had supported him. Cruel and ambitious, Caracalla extended Roman citizenship to all free men of the empire, not from generosity, but to widen the tax base. He too was struck down, assassinated on campaign. The dynasty staggered through weak rulers, plots, and assassinations, until at last it collapsed. With its fall, the empire descended into a century of chaos. The 3rd century crisis. From 235 to 284 CE, Rome entered what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. It was a time when emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, most dying by the sword. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors claimed the throne, many ruling only months before being killed by rivals or their own soldiers. Civil war raged endlessly. Generals declared themselves emperor, provinces broke away, legions fought legions while borders crumbled. The empire fractured. The Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, leaving Rome a shadow of itself. Meanwhile, external enemies pressed hard. Germanic tribes raided across the Rhine and Danube, burning towns, plundering farms. The Persians, under the Sasanian dynasty, struck deep into Roman lands, capturing cities, even seizing Emperor Valerian alive, humiliating Rome as no enemy had in centuries. And as if war were not enough, plague struck again, devastating populations, while the economy collapsed under the weight of devalued coinage, heavy taxes, and famine. Rome, once eternal, seemed on the brink of dissolution. Soldier emperors. The emperors of this age were not statesmen or philosophers. They were soldiers, men raised from the ranks, acclaimed by their troops, who ruled by force and died by force. Some fought bravely to defend the empire. Aurelian, called Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world, reconquered the breakaway Gallic and Palmyrene empires, uniting Rome once more. He fortified the city of Rome itself with massive walls, still standing today. Yet even he fell to assassination. No emperor could rest easy. The purple cloak became not a symbol of glory, but a target for daggers. The rise of Diocletian. At last, out of the storm, one man rose who would reshape the empire. Diocletian. A soldier of humble birth, hardened by campaigns, he became emperor in 284 CE. Unlike many before him, he understood that the empire was too vast, too unstable, for one man to govern alone. His solution was radical: divide the empire. Diocletian created the Tetrarchy, rule by 4. He appointed a co-emperor and 2 junior emperors, each ruling a region of the empire. Together, they could respond to threats more swiftly, share power, and strengthen control. He also reformed the economy, the army, and the bureaucracy, tightening discipline, raising taxes, fixing prices. His rule was harsh but effective. For the first time in a century, Rome knew stability. But Diocletian also unleashed one of the fiercest persecutions of Christians, seeing their refusal to honor the Roman gods as a threat to unity. Churches were destroyed, scriptures burned, believers tortured and executed. Yet persecution only strengthened Christianity, spreading faith even in the shadows of fear. After 20 years, Diocletian did what no emperor had ever done before. He retired, withdrawing to a palace in Dalmatia to tend his gardens. The empire endured, reshaped, but the seeds of division were now firmly planted. The shifting spirit of Rome. In these centuries, something profound changed. Rome was no longer the same republic that had conquered Italy. nor the same empire that Augustus had built. It had become a different creature. The old ideals of civic duty, of the Senate, of shared power were long gone. What remained was power rooted in the army, emperors forged in the camp, authority maintained by fear and force. And beneath it all, a spiritual shift was underway. Traditional gods still had their temples. Sacrifices still filled the air with smoke, but new faiths spread relentlessly. Mystery cults, Eastern deities, and above all Christianity, whispered a different message. That Rome's power was not eternal, that another kingdom, a kingdom not of this world, was rising. And so, dear traveler, we leave Rome in the aftermath of the 3rd century crisis. The empire has nearly fallen, yet survived. Generals became emperors, provinces broke away and were reclaimed, plague and war ravaged the land, yet still Rome endures. But it is not the same Rome. Diocletian's reforms have saved it, but also divided it. The spirit of the empire has changed. Ahead lies Constantine, the Christian emperor, and the birth of a new Rome. A Rome of crosses instead of eagles. A Rome that looks east to Byzantium. A Rome forever transformed. Rest now, for in our next part we will walk with Constantine, through visions and battles, through faith and empire, as the old gods fade and a new religion takes Rome's throne. Good evening once more, dear traveler. We have endured the storms of the 3rd century, seen emperors rise and fall like sparks in the dark, watched Rome fracture and reunite, bleed and yet survive. We have walked with Diocletian, who sought order through division, who tried to save the empire by reshaping it. But now a new figure steps onto the stage, a man whose vision would change not only Rome, but the course of history itself. His name was Constantine, and with him, the empire of Jupiter and Mars would become the empire of the cross. The struggle for power. After Diocletian retired in 305 CE, his tetrarchy collapsed into rivalry. For rulers became 6, then more, each backed by armies, each seeking supremacy. Civil wars once again tore through the empire. In this chaos, Constantine rose. Son of Constantius, one of Diocletian's co-emperors, Constantine was seasoned by campaigns in Britain and Gaul. Tall, commanding, charismatic, he quickly won the loyalty of his soldiers. But rivals stood in his way. Maxentius in Italy, Licinius in the east. The empire once more seemed destined for endless civil war. The vision at the Milvian Bridge. In 312 CE, Constantine marched against Maxentius, meeting him at the Milvian Bridge outside Rome. The night before battle, Constantine experienced a vision, a sign, that would forever alter the empire's fate. He saw, it is said, a cross of light in the sky, with the words, "In this sign, conquer." That night, in dreams, Christ appeared to him, promising victory if he fought under the symbol of the cross. The next day, Constantine ordered his soldiers to mark their shields with the Chi, the first letters of Christ's name. Against all odds, he triumphed. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber, and Constantine entered Rome as victor, hailed not only as emperor, but as chosen by a new god. The Edict of Milan. The following year, in 313 CE, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire. For the first time, Christians were free to worship openly, their churches restored, their faith protected. Centuries of persecution ended in an instant. From the catacombs and hidden houses, Christians emerged into the sunlight. Bishops filled the streets, churches rose across cities, and the faith that had once been whispered in fear now rang out in triumph. The foundation of Constantinople. Constantine's vision was not only spiritual but also political. He saw that Rome, ancient and glorious, was no longer the best seat of power. Its Senate was proud, its traditions stubborn, its location far from the frontiers where danger loomed. So he founded a new capital, Byzantium, renamed Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Situated on the Bosporus, it commanded the crossroads of Europe and Asia, guarded by seas and walls. There, Constantine built palaces, forums, and churches. There, the empire would endure for 1,000 years after Rome itself had fallen. Constantinople was more than a city. It was a symbol. Rome had shifted eastward, and with it, the future of the empire. The Council of Nicaea. But Constantine's legacy was not only in stone. It was also in faith. Christianity, newly free, was not yet united. Disputes raged over doctrine, who Christ was, how he related to God the Father, what truth the Church should proclaim. These disputes threatened to divide the very faith Constantine had embraced. In 325 CE, he called bishops from across the empire to the Council of Nicaea. There, amid heated debate, the Nicene Creed was forged, a statement of belief that defined Christianity for centuries to come. Constantine, though not yet baptized himself, stood as the protector of the Church, the emperor who bound faith and empire together. Constantine's reforms. Constantine also reshaped the empire's institutions. He strengthened the army, reorganized provinces, reformed taxation. Gold coins, the solidus, stabilized the economy for generations. Yet his greatest innovation was the fusion of throne and altar. No longer was the emperor merely the servant of the gods. Now he was God's chosen ruler, protector of the Christian faith. The old gods still lingered, temples still stood, sacrifices still burned, but their days were numbered. The baptism of Constantine. In 337 CE, after more than 3 decades of rule, Constantine lay dying. Only then did he receive baptism, purified at the end of his life, embracing fully the faith he had protected. With his death, the empire was left to his sons, divided once more. Yet his legacy was eternal. Constantine had transformed Rome from a pagan empire into a Christian one. The gods of Olympus had yielded to the god of the cross. The fading of pagan Rome. After Constantine, the old religion of Rome withered. Emperors like Julian the Apostate tried to restore the ancient gods, but their efforts failed. Christianity spread among rich and poor alike, binding the empire with a new vision. Temples became churches, altars became shrines to saints, and the festivals of the old gods were reborn as Christian feasts. The empire of Jupiter and Mars had ended. The empire of Christ had begun. And so, dear traveler, we leave Constantine at the dawn of a new world. Rome, once ruled by kings, then by senators, then by emperors, is now ruled by an emperor who bows to Christ. The cross has risen above the eagle, and a new destiny has taken hold. Yet the empire is still fragile. Enemies press at its borders. Civil wars simmer. And though Constantinople gleams, the old city of Rome begins to fade. Ahead lies the final act, the fall of the Western Empire, when barbarians will storm its gates, when emperors will be cast down, and when Rome itself will pass into memory. Rest now, for in our next part we will walk into that final twilight, the fall of the Western Empire. Good evening, dear traveler. We have walked far together, from the wolf that nursed Romulus, to the Senate of the Republic, to the triumph of Augustus, to the glory of Trajan, to the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, to the vision of Constantine. Rome has risen higher than any empire before her. But tonight we enter the last chapter. For though Rome seemed eternal, though her monuments gleamed and her legions marched across continents, time itself would prove stronger. The Western Empire would fall, its emperors reduced to shadows, its city sacked, its crown broken. This is the story of decline and fall. Not sudden, but slow, like a great tree rotting from within before crashing to the earth. Pressures on the frontiers. By the 4th century, Rome faced endless pressure from beyond her borders. Germanic tribes pressed along the Rhine and Danube, Goths, Vandals, Franks, Saxons. In the east, the Persians challenged Rome's strength, while nomads stirred the steppes. For centuries, the legions had held the line. But now, weakened by civil wars, drained by taxation, and stretched too thin, Rome could no longer guard her frontiers as before. To fill the ranks, emperors recruited barbarians themselves, Goths and Germans who fought for Rome but held their own loyalties. The empire was defending itself with the very hands that would one day tear it apart. Division of the empire. In 395 CE, after the death of Theodosius I, the empire was permanently divided between East and West. The East, with its wealth, cities, and the stronghold of Constantinople, endured. But the West, poorer, less urbanized, plagued by invasions, began to wither. Rome itself was no longer the center. Emperors ruled from Milan, then Ravenna, as the city of Rome became a symbol more than a seat of power. The Senate lingered, but only as an echo of its ancient dignity. The Goths and the sack of Rome. In 410 CE, disaster struck. The Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, marched into Italy. Rome, unprepared, faltered. For the first time in nearly 800 years, the Eternal City was sacked. The world shook. Pagans claimed the old gods had abandoned Rome because she had embraced Christianity. Christians, like Augustine, responded with words that would echo for centuries. The city of God endures, even if the city of man falls. The sack was not total destruction, but it was a wound that never healed. Rome's aura of invincibility was shattered. Attila the Hun. From the steppes came another terror, the Huns. Fierce horsemen, they swept across Europe, driving Germanic tribes before them. Their king, Attila, became known as the Scourge of God. In 452 CE, he marched into Italy itself, threatening Rome. Legend tells that Pope Leo I met Attila, persuading him to turn back. Whether by diplomacy, disease, or the weight of his own supply lines, Attila withdrew. But the terror he inspired left Rome trembling. The Vandals and the Second Sack. In 455 CE, Rome was sacked again, this time by the Vandals. Unlike Alaric's Goths, the Vandals plundered ruthlessly, carrying off treasures, destroying what they could not take. Even today, their name echoes as a synonym for destruction. Rome, once the mistress of the world, was now prey to the very tribes she had once despised. The fall of the last emperor. By the late 5th century, the Western Empire was only a shadow. Its emperors ruled little beyond Italy. The legions were filled with mercenaries. The treasury was empty, the Senate powerless. In 476 CE, the final blow fell. The Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus. The name itself was symbolic. Romulus, first king of Rome. Augustus, first emperor. With his fall, the line ended. Odoacer did not claim the title of emperor. He ruled Italy as king, acknowledging the distant authority of the Eastern emperor in Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire was no more, the legacy of Rome. Yet Rome did not truly die. Her empire had ended, but her legacy lived on. Her laws shaped kingdoms across Europe. Her roads and aqueducts remained. Her language, Latin, gave birth to tongues that still speak today: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. Her faith, Christianity, spread across the world, carried by popes and priests, monks and martyrs. Even the barbarians who conquered her dreamed of Rome, called themselves her heirs, wore her titles. The idea of Rome, Roma Aeterna, eternal Rome, never faded. And so, dear traveler, our journey ends. We have walked from the cradle of twins suckled by a wolf, to the Senate of the Republic, to the emperors in their marble palaces, to the ruins of a fallen city. We have seen Rome rise, rule, and fall, but perhaps Rome never truly fell. For in every city built with arches and columns, in every courtroom where law is spoken, in every book that carries the wisdom of Latin, Rome still lives. The empire is gone, but its shadow stretches across millennia. Rome is not merely history. Rome is memory, Rome is legacy, Rome is us. Rest now, for the story is complete, but the echo of Rome will never fade.